The Dissipating Spoon is a nonfiction book by Sam Keenan, and it is definitely one of the best titles of all time. It references a magic trick where you would replace silverware spoons with gallium spoons. And gallium is a metal with a very, very low melting point. So when you used it to spin any hot liquid like tea or coffee, it would just melt and fall into the liquid, functionally disappearing. This should give you an insight to what the Dissipating Spoon is about. It's a lot of awesome, hilarious, funny things about the elements on the periodic table compiled into a narrative story-like book. The Dissipating Spoon is not about pranks with elements, although that would be a really funny book anyway, unfortunately. But it is about more of a biography of the elements. What I mean is that it compiles a bunch of the interesting stories about all the elements of the periodic table, and then uses this narrative kind of storytelling to make it sound interesting and not like a textbook. The best part about this is that it coincides with a bunch of other historical events like wars, plagues, famines, and sometimes just specific people, their stories like Lewis. And in the end, the entire book is very, very interesting. It doesn't really lose my attention very often, and it isn't horribly focused on science either, so you can still relax your brain from thinking too much about chemistry. One of the main benefits of this book is the fact that its scope is so wide. It doesn't just cover one specific incident in one part of history. It doesn't just cover one element either. It covers a lot of the elements on the periodic table, even things that people never think to talk about or use in daily life, like francium, which has a half-life of 2 seconds. It talks about cadmium poisoning. It talks about mercury poisoning. The intro is focused on mercury entirely. It talks about the noble gases, how you can force them to react. It talks about superfluid helium. It covers so many different parts of chemistry, parts of even physics, and then compiles them all into a very brief summary. And it just overall makes it such an interesting book that jumps from point to point and doesn't really have to focus on one thing all the time. The main benefit of this is that the Dissipating Spoon gets a much more interesting narrative than most books would, because it doesn't just cover one topic. Now, obviously, if you're interested in only one topic, so be it. But most people will not be, especially if you don't like chemistry as a whole. You need to have more of an interesting cover of everything that you could learn in chemistry. And the Dissipating Spoon does that very, very well. Why would you want to read this book? Well, if you're genuinely interested in the field of chemistry, if you like reading biographies, or if you just like plain history, this book is for you. The style is really humorous. It's enjoyable. It's not like a science textbook. It's not entirely just about the nitty-gritty details of chemistry. And it does a relatively good job of explaining how certain things work and why they function in some ways, and wraps it up nicely with something to think about. So you don't need a huge background in chemistry. You just need to know the basics. Here are some reasons why you shouldn't read this book. If you don't like chemistry, if you don't like history, or you just have no prior knowledge of chemistry, elements, periodic table, whatever, then this book is not really for you. It's hard to enjoy the book if you don't understand most of it. Although, like I said, it does try to explain most concepts. It will have some sensitive terminology, some basic ones like charge, electrostatics, strong nuclear force, etc. If you don't know much about any of these topics, then I wouldn't recommend you read the book immediately, because some of it might not make sense and it won't be as enjoyable. So in conclusion, The Dissipating Spoon is a great narrative biography of the periodic table of elements. It doesn't overload you with too much knowledge. It has really fun stories, and just generally is just interesting. Pick up this book if you want some insights into the field of chemistry and the impacts it has on history.